Hello, welcome back to Miner Network. We're in Miami and I'm joined again with Matt James, the CEO of Manganese. Matt, good to see you again.
Hi, nice to see you, Peter.
Obviously, we did an interview in Quebec, which I think people really enjoyed. But for those who potentially missed that, remind us of the company overview and the capital structure.
Sure. So Manganese is a battery metals company with a project in the Czech Republic to produce high purity manganese, the only manganese resource in the EU. Market cap is about 100 million, mainly institutionally held. We're listed on the Australian Stock Exchange and the Toronto Ventures Exchange.
Brilliant. What was the before we go into it, actually, what was the background around ASX and TSX?
When the company listed, IPO'd, they actually did a dual IPO on both markets. I think Australia has a good following on the battery metals.
Yep.
Our broker down there, Canaccord, is done a lot of deals in the battery metal space, and I think the Australian market sort of gets it. And then obviously being headquartered in Vancouver, they want to do a TSX listing as well.
Brilliant. Okay. And I just want to take a step back and look at the macro here and actually the commodity, because obviously there's a lot of manganese out there around the world, but high purity sulfate manganese monohydrate is less so. There's a real problem with the processing bottleneck there around the globe. This is the market you're entering. Maybe we can just talk a bit about that. For those less familiar with manganese in general, obviously this is a huge battery metal. It's less spoken about than lithium and cobalt and nickel. Maybe you can just give us a bit of an overview as to which sort of batteries it's used for, what the sort of price environment is, and what demand and supply is looking like.
95% of the world's manganese goes into the steel industry. And that's what people think of when they think manganese. But the NMC chemistries, the M stands for manganese. So every NMC chemistry requires manganese. And even the LFP chemistries are now moving to LMFP, adding manganese to increase the energy density. So it's a hugely important metal, but both the financial markets and the industry has been focusing on securing lithium, nickel, cobalt, but they're now turning their attention to manganese.
Yep.
One of the reasons is because manganese is actually the most affordable battery metal. So there are chemistries coming out with high manganese rich chemistries, because it lowers the cost of the cathode, lowers the cost of the battery. And with the prices of the other metals going to the extremes like lithium, this is becoming more and more important to address that middle to entry level market as well. So we've got three demand drivers for high purity manganese: just the underlying growth of the EV industry, then the move to manganese rich chemistries, and then because most of the manganese processing, as you mentioned, is in China for high purity, the IRA Act and the European Critical Raw Materials Act demanding local ESG compliant materials means that this processing needs to move out of China into Europe. There's only a very, very small amount in Europe. There's no high purity manganese processing in North America today either.
I find that surprising, especially as there's such a big build out of EVs in North America. Do you have any idea of how many plants are scheduled to go live in North America?
Globally, they talk about 300 gigafactories being built. Now, I don't think all of those will get to the final finishing line, but the OEMs, their own targets are demanding huge amounts of gigafactories being built around the world, and some of them are moving upstream, like VW building their own battery plants, Tesla building their own battery plants. So, and then others partnering up with the Northvolts of the world, etc.
Let's move on to obviously your project in the Czech Republic. We touched on this before. It's not a traditional mine as such. You're producing tailings, which I think personally has a lot of good benefits, especially in the processing side and the environmental side. You have released updated economics since we last chatted. I was hoping we might be able to run through those briefly.
Sure.
So post-tax numbers, capital costs, things like that.
I'm really excited about this project because we're actually cleaning up the environment. It is processing historical tailings, and those are currently leaching into the groundwater. They're leaching sulfates into the groundwater every day. when we process it, when we put our tailings back, they'll be lined, dry stacked, capped, and that will stop that pollution, which for the company is, just using standard best practice. But for the people working in the company, it's one of the passions about doing this project. And for the local community, it's really important as well that, we're actually cleaning up the environment rather than creating a mine, which is a problem. In July, we released our feasibility study in 2022. And that was a high price environment at the time. But we've used those numbers in the capital cost and operating cost. But the project's very robust. It's got a 1.3 billion post-tax NPV. That's using our base case assumptions. A 22% post-tax internal rate of return, fully equity. That's based on fully equity finance. Good margins, about 60% margins on the asset. 25-year mine life, producing, about 50,000 tons of product on a manganese metal equivalent basis, which is about 150,000 tons on manganese sulfate, which is what the industry actually uses.
Okay. Yeah. And what did all-in sustaining costs look like? Could you also just go into what manganese price you were using at the time compared to sort of where it is now as well?
Sure. So there's a price profile, which is in our presentations, and it shows the price increasing up to 2031, and then it holds flat at 4,000. On that price profile, where we are today is about $2,500. That's about the price of high purity manganese in Europe today. We are moving into a deficit, right? The demand that I mentioned before is growing from a market of about 170,000 tons to over 1 million tons of high purity manganese. And even if you take all the processing in China and the plans that have been announced in China and around the world for potential projects, even those, highly, skeptical projects, even with all of that added in, we're going to move into a deficit by about 2024. So I think a modest increase in price is, it's quite conservative.
Yeah.
And when you look at the other battery metals and how they've responded to when we get into a deficit. So yeah, $4,000 per ton is our long-term price in the feasibility study.
Good. And what's the all-in sustaining cost of actually producing that sort of per ton?
So our all-in costs are around $1,550 per ton.
Okay, so strong margins.
So strong margins in there, yeah.
Okay, and how are things progressing on the environmental and sort of social side in terms of actually getting the licenses for this? Because you're getting, even since we spoke in Quebec in June, there's so much that's happened. You've really progressed this.
Yeah. So the preliminary EIA went in 2020, and we got the feedback into there. With having completed the feasibility study, we now had all the data to put into the final environmental social impact assessment. That's a lot of work that the team's done. They've done a great job, and we have now submitted that final environmental social impact assessment in December. It's a 6-month process in the Czech Republic. It's quite a well-documented, structured process. So June, July, all being well, no delays, then we expect to receive that environmental social impact assessment.
So on the processing side, I just wanted to touch on this because you have been verified by Nano One Materials. Essentially, there's a one pot. I was wondering if you could go into this because it's not a process I'm particularly familiar with.
Yeah, so Nano One is a Canadian company. They're working with multiple OEMs as well as cathode producers. It's public, they're working with BASF and Umicore. They have a process called metal to cam, one pot process. So instead of using sulfates, which do present a pollution problem for the cathode active material makers in disposal of sodium sulfate, they have this one pot process, goes straight from metal to cathode active material. They've qualified our metal from our pilot plant at this stage in their process. And as we move forward with the demonstration plant, they will then take larger samples from a demonstration plant and continue with that development of their process.
Well, how's the demonstration plant going?
Yeah, it's going really well. So the demonstration plant arrived on site in September last year.
Mm-hmm.
So started installation in November, fully connecting it to utilities, connecting up the power, connecting the different modules to each other in 2 fully refurbished buildings. It looks fantastic. We started commissioning in December. We started at the front end of the plant, the mineral processing end, so the slurry into the magnetic separation to produce a concentrate. That's now fully commissioned and producing on-spec concentrate. In January, we started the leaching and purification process. That's now fully commissioned, and we're producing qualified solution to go into the electrowinning step. We've just started that this week, and so I'm confident that we'll produce good quality metal. And then the back end of this quarter, we then commission the dissolution and crystallization step to produce that manganese sulfate product. Once we've done the full commissioning, Q2, we'll then be able to send material out to customers from the demonstration plant. So that's an exciting step for the company.
It is, and also there's been some additional verification of your product as well, with obviously Verkor coming on to take offtake. What gave them the confidence to do that? Because obviously the demonstration plant is in full commission and sort of producing next quarter. What product have they seen? Why did they take it on? Maybe you could talk a little bit about them as well.
Yeah, so we've had multiple samples go out to customers from our pilot plants, which were run in China, kilograms of samples, and Verkor were one of those. They've also been to site. They've seen, they've walked the deposit and seen the demonstration plant being installed. And what was really important for Verkor was the low CO2 footprint of our plant. The fact that it's locally produced and so clear, transparent local supply chain. That gave them the confidence to move forward with this offtake term sheet. In the full offtake contract, which we're now moving to, there will be qualification steps for both the demonstration plant and the commercial plant. But as long as we continue to produce on-spec material, then having that demonstration plant will shorten the qualification period for the actual commercial plant as well during its ramp up.
And tell me a bit more about Verkor, because they're a French-based, very low carbon battery manufacturer. Maybe you could just run us through a little bit about who they are, who they supply to.
So Verkor will be the main battery supplier to Renault. Renault is a shareholder and on the board of Verkor.
Nice.
They're building their gigafactory in Dunkirk in France. They like to see them sort of refer to themselves as this. You've got the North Vault in Sweden, and they're the South Vault. But very well backed with obviously Renault and other major companies as shareholders.
And I wanted to, something that I do love about the project as well is the renewable aspect to it and the power generation. So maybe, because this in theory is going to be one of the lowest carbon footprint manganese projects on the planet.
That's right. So we have a MOU with Statkraft, one of the largest renewable power providers in Europe, to supply 100% renewable energy to the plant. That then allows us to drive to a CO2 footprint. We've done an independent life cycle assessment that's been published by Minvaro and RGS Global. That is, our CO2 footprint will be 1/3 of that of the incumbent industry in China. So again, when our customers are looking at dropping their CO2 footprint, which is really important for the batteries, having a CO2 footprint that low is a real differentiator for us.
Good. Okay. Well, it sounds like we're sort of getting to the final hurdles now with this project. Your EIA that will come back sort of in the summer, by the sounds of it.
Yes.
Your demonstration plant is almost there in terms of fully commissioned and will be producing it. You'll surely need to be making a final investment decision at some point. When might that be, and what does the financing solution around this potentially look like?
Yeah. So, I guess another key step just before we get to financing is the EPCM contracts. We put out our EPCM tender documentation. We received 5 very high quality bids from international EPCM companies. We're now narrowing that down to choose and appoint our EPCM contractor by the end of Q1. And then that leads into the financing. Well, if we're starting that EPCM journey, then we need to raise the funds to continue with that and to a final investment decision. The way we're thinking about this is obviously gearing it with 65% debt We've appointed Stifel as our
Yep.
debt advisor. The way we're thinking about the debt is the European institutions. So EBRD, the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, is our second largest shareholder. They want to be a cornerstone debt provider as well. And also the EIB are very interested in being a debt provider. We're talking to the export credit agencies, the ESG funds, and the commercial banks as well, project finance commercial banks. So the debt side is looking very strong. Then there's the equity side. And, with a market cap of $100 million and a $750 million project, we have to break down that equity into three pieces. The first step is we want to sell down at the project level 10 to 20% of the project to an off-taker or an OEM.
Yep.
At a multiple of our share price, but a discount to the NPV of the project. That will then bring a solid partner on board. They will contribute their portion of the equity for the project build. We'll receive the cash from the sell down, and we'll be able to contribute that to the equity. And then the second and third stage to fill any equity gap on a hopefully re-rated share price will be a private placement to large institutions, and then a public offering on the stock exchange.
Brilliant. Okay. So I think you've got that side of the business, which is now going on very well. Obviously, I wanted to touch on Quebec as well, because there is a growth opportunity here and it's fairly new. I mean, you made the announcement back in November. Maybe you could just run us through what that adds potentially to the economics, not even just the economic, but to the future of this company.
Yeah, I'm really excited about Quebec. It allows us to access the North American market and will be the first high purity manganese processor in the North American market. What the concept is just building the final step of the process. So in our process in Kralovice in the Czech Republic, we make a metal, and then we take that metal and we produce a sulfate. So what we plan to do is take some of that metal over to North America, to Quebec, to Bécancour, where you have, GM POSCO, BASF building CAM plants there. And we can do the dissolution. For those CAM plants in Bécancour, we can skip the crystallization step and just pipe solution to them. But we will have crystallization capacity there as well to service other cathode active makers in the North American market. We're even examining the potential to source metal before Kralovice is up in production, maybe at a smaller scale, and to get into that market even earlier.
Brilliant. So this really opens it. You've already got the European market with Core. You've opened that door.
Yeah.
This now opens up a completely new market for
you. It does. And the longer term growth horizon is to have a full North American supply chain from ore right through to end product.
Brilliant.
But that's, in the future.
Good. Looking forward to it. Matt, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.